Hello, everyone. I'm Jenna Paone with A Mighty Blaze, and today I'm so thrilled on our Frontliner Fridays. We have the incredible New York Times bestselling Courtney Sullivan. Welcome, Courtney. How are you doing today?
I'm so happy to be here with you. Thank you for having me.
Oh my gosh, we're so happy to have you. Thank you so much for doing this. We are so thrilled to celebrate your newest release, Friends and Strangers. It is awesome. It's such a good book.
Thank you.
One of many. Every time I read one of your books, I'm always absolutely delighted. I look forward to it. I get so excited when
Thank
there's a new
you.
Courtney Sullivan book out, and this one is no exception. So congratulations.
Thank you so much.
You're so welcome. We're going to kick things off by me doing my spiel on basically sitting here and praising you for 20 minutes. And then we'll get into some
Great.
questions. So feel free to sit back, relax, and enjoy listening about yourself. To all of
Wonderful.
you who are joining us, thank you for joining us. Please enter some questions for Courtney in the comments if you'd like, and we'll try to get to some of them towards the latter part of the interview. And she's just a delight. We've already been chatting behind the scenes, and this is going to be a fun time. So strap yourself in. Introducing Courtney Sullivan, who is the New York Times bestselling author of the novels Commencement, Maine, The Engagements, Saints for All Occasions, and her most recent release, which we're celebrating today, Friends and Strangers. Maine was named a Best Book of the Year by Time Magazine and a Washington Post Notable Book of 2011. The Engagements was one of People Magazine's top 10 books of 2013 and an Irish Times Best Book of the Year. It is soon to be a major motion picture produced by Reese Witherspoon and distributed by Fox 2000, and it will be translated into 17 languages. Saints for All Occasions. Did we lose Courtney? Nope, there you are. You were like, my ears are burning. I have to. Saints for All Occasions was named one of the 10 best books of the year by the Washington Post, a New York Times Critics Pick for 2017, and a New England Book Award nominee. Courtney's writing has also appeared in the New York Times, Book Review, the Chicago Tribune, New York Magazine, Elle, Glamour, Allure, Real Simple, and the Oprah Magazine, among many others. She is the co-editor, along with Courtney Martin, of the essay anthology Click, When We Knew We Were Feminists. In 2017, she wrote the forwards to the new editions of two of her favorite classic novels and two of mine, Anne of Green Gables and Little Women. Those are my all-time favorite novels ever. So maybe we'll chat about that too.
Yes.
A Massachusetts native, Courtney now lives in New York, although maybe we'll update her husband and two children. Her most recent release, Friends and Strangers, is an insightful, hilarious, and compulsively readable novel about a complicated friendship between two women who are at two very different stages of life. Elizabeth, an accomplished journalist and new mother, struggling to adjust to life in a small upstate New York town, and Sam, a senior at the local women's college, caught in a tug of war between ambition and a romantic entanglement that threatens her future plans. When Elizabeth hires Sam to babysit her young son, the two grow close. But when Sam finds an unlikely kindred spirit in Elizabeth's father-in-law, the true differences between the women's lives become starkly revealed, and a betrayal has devastating consequences. A masterful exploration of motherhood, power dynamics, and privilege in its many forms, Friends and Strangers reveals how a single year can shape the course of a life. And it has received rave reviews from pretty much every critiquing outlet in the world, including the New York Times, Washington Post, Vogue, People Magazine, Good Morning America, Kirkus, She Reads, and more. And it's Jenna B. Hager's Read with Jenna pick for July, and it's still July, so still join in and read along with Jenna. Publishers Weekly says of Friends and Strangers, Sullivan's intimate, incisive latest explores the evolving friendship between a new mother and her babysitter. Readers will be captivated by Sullivan's authentic portrait of modern motherhood. Thank you so much for being here with us, Courtney.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. That was an amazing introduction. Thank you so much.
I always feel so bad because they take a little while, but you are such an accomplished woman. I want everybody to know, and I'm sure everyone joining us today is well versed. But without further ado, let's talk about Friends and Strangers. I'm so thrilled. at its heart, Friends and Strangers explores this very unique and complex type of female relationship, which is the relationship between a mother and her child's caregiver, which is one of the most, complicated things out there. And
Yeah.
you yourself are a mother of two, and you've also you have a history with babysitting, from what I understand, and so you've been on both sides of
Yes.
this relationship. How did those experiences, both as a mother and a babysitter, inspire you in terms of writing this book and exploring this relationship on the page?
Well, just as you said, I've been on both sides of this relationship now. And so when I started writing the book, my son he just turned 3 in June 22nd. So I was pregnant with him when I started writing the book. And my daughter is 16 months younger than my son. So I had 2 kids in the time it took me to write this book. And that whole sort of, I've told people that most of my books require so much research into lives that are really different from my own. And this book, there wasn't as much of that, but I think it was because I was actually living a life that felt really different from my own as I had my first child and then had my second child very quickly thereafter. And so I felt like I was sort of learning things in my own life all the time. And there was so much to sort of mine. But so here's the thing with the origin of this book. I think, as a lot of writers probably have experienced, sometimes, something happens, there's a moment, there's a conversation, whatever it is, an idea, and you kind of know you will write about it, but it may not be right now. It might not really be the time yet, but you kind of put it in your pocket for later, knowing that it's something. And so about, I guess, 8 or 9 years ago, I was at Smith College, where I went to college, to give a reading from my book, Maine, I think. And after the reading, I came out, I was walking to my car, standing at the crosswalk, and I'm just kind of, thinking, it's like it had been 10 years since I graduated, and I'm back, and I'm, speaking on campus. And so I'm having one of those moments where different versions of yourself are kind of overlapping.
Yep. Past.
And yes. And I'm standing at the crosswalk, and this huge SUV pulls up. Behind the wheel is this woman, Catherine, whose baby I cared for my senior year of college.
Oh.
And she had just moved from New York to this small town.
Sounds
and
familiar.
we really kind of struck up a friendship. And she very much encouraged me to sort of travel down the path that I ended up traveling down. Very much encouraged me to go to New York, to pursue writing and all of this. So I see her, and it's been 10 years. I'm like, oh my God. And I'm waving, hello, oh my gosh, it's me. And she had no idea who I was. And so that night was telling a friend this story. And she said, and she's a writer too. And she said, that should be your next novel, right? That's like the beginning scene of your next novel. And I thought, yeah, I like that, but I couldn't exactly figure out how I would sustain it over the course of a whole book. Like, what would it be? And I knew what the babysitter would have to say, but I wasn't sure, do I want to write a whole novel from this babysitter's point of view? Because I've already written a novel from the point of view of college students and, young 20 somethings. And so, when I was pregnant with my son, all of a sudden it did dawn on me exactly what you said, that soon I'm going to be that mother. When you're a babysitter, it's really the ultimate job for a writer. And I have noticed that a lot of writers were babysitters, because you get to peer into someone else's world. Yes. You get to see what they are like behind closed doors, and it's endlessly fascinating. And the more time you spend with a family, the more you become sort of just part of the background, and you experience things, you hear things, you are part of things. And so, thinking back on when I was a babysitter and things I thought about mothers, and how different it is when it's really, when your whole life is this child, not just a few hours a day or whatever it might be, as much as you love the kids you babysit for. Right. I just thought, oh, this is an opportunity to kind of have a conversation with my younger self about
I love
the
that.
choices she made
Mhm.
and what she imagined this part of life would be like and what it's actually like.
Which is so important because there's, we've all gone through, like I think about, being 20 and now being in my mid 30s, and in that family space of it, it's so different from what you expected, and maybe you thought you never would have it, or you never, you didn't make any plans for it. So having that featured of this woman who has been there and
Yeah.
lived the life that maybe the younger one wants, and Elizabeth and Sam, like, Sam wants to go off and have these adventures and do certain things, and I'm trying not to give anything away, but yeah. But it is interesting because you become, as you said, really a part of the furniture. You become part of the family, but
Hmm.
you're not a part of the family. And you do see, you have a wonderful op-ed that you wrote in the New York Times where you said, the babysitter always knows. Everybody says you don't know what goes on in a marriage, but a babysitter always knows because you see it. Was it weird to write? Did you find that you had an easier time writing, because you always write in multiple points of view, and you do such a great job of exploring different sides of different perspectives on these complicated, thorny issues. Did you have trouble slipping into one woman's voice over the other? Was Elizabeth easier for you, or Sam? Which one? I'm curious if you struggled with one or found one easier.
Well, when I was pregnant, I knew that I wasn't really sure what Elizabeth would really truly think about new motherhood yet.
Mhm.
Or I guess I should say
Yeah,
I didn't know what I would think about new motherhood yet,
right.
and I wanted to have a really authentic, version of that. And I think it kind of started when I was trying to get pregnant, which was a tricky process for me. And
As
it
it's
was the first time that since I was probably in my first year of college,
Mhm.
that I went back and started like writing down what was actually happening day to day
Oh,
and
interesting.
almost journaling. I wouldn't
Yep.
have thought of it as journaling, but just writing down like these crazy things that would happen and that like, fertility doctors would say, and just crazy things that I had never thought about or encountered before. And also that so many of my friends were going through these things,
Mhm.
and realizing at this age that this relationship that women have with their own bodies, that is like there's so much in our culture about kind of keeping things at a distance,
Ah,
and but women are like I always think about, this is probably kind of a gross thing to say, but I always think about like the commercials for tampons where they're like, here's this blue liquid, and you're like, what is that blue
you're
liquid? When
like,
you're a kid, right? You're like, what is that? That's
yeah,
interesting. But but women, like it's so graphic, it's so,
yeah.
women are so courageous, like what we
Mhm.
go through,
Oh yeah,
and
it's
not just
messy.
all of it, and not just giving birth, which we do kind of hear about, but also just trying to get pregnant, and the women who lose pregnancies, and what you're supposed to, how you're supposed to process that, and how you're supposed to, don't tell anyone you're pregnant till you're 3 months along. But then most women who miscarry, it's happening much before then. So then you're not supposed to tell anyone that you're experiencing that. I mean, it's just
Right.
this whole, so many things, so many things.
It's
So
so it's so complex. There's this added layer because so many of us now are having children later in life. So the reality
mhm,
is that it's not a linear process. It's not an easy
yes.
process. And we're still transitioning into this insane thing of motherhood, which is, studies have shown it's the most dramatic transition a woman will ever undergo, psychologically, emotionally, physically,
Yes.
mentally, if she does decide to be a mother and chooses to do that. And
Hmm.
you are really living that while you wrote this, which strikes me as incredibly brave of you to kind of, talk about the not so glamorous parts and maybe the difficult parts. Was that challenging for you to bring that up, or was that a way of you processing it? And I'm really interested. That's the first part of the question, but I want to hear about, that transition and how it affected you as a writer and how it changed you as a writer, because it's so significant. So maybe, sorry, let's do
I
the
think
first part
this
of
is
the question.
definitely in some ways my most personal book, like Elizabeth is not me, I am not her, but definitely her experiences of new motherhood are completely, sort of pulled from my own and those of my close friends. One of my best friends, had a miscarriage in really the same way that, and the book's not all about miscarriages, somehow we keep coming back to that, but in the same way that,
the reality of
yes, in the same way that Nomi, Elizabeth's friend in the book does, and so I asked my best friend, do you want me to take this out? She was like, no, I want you to even go deeper into it because we don't talk about these things enough, but so many of us experience them. And, part of it too, I think, is like women, a certain kind of woman, is like, I'm going to get myself to this place. I'm going to get this great education. I'm going to get this great job. I'm going to live in this city that I want to live in. But like at the end of the day, this is the one thing that's like, you have no control over it. Like you decide you want to get pregnant or maybe you don't even decide you want to get pregnant, but you do. Or, many of my friends, like when they decided they wanted to have a baby, it either happened so fast that they were really upset or it took so long that they were really upset. I don't think I've ever met anyone who was like, I got pregnant at the exact perfect time that I wanted to get pregnant, because it's like so life altering. Of course, it feels like, oh, this can't possibly be the right time for this, So I think that, and that's just in the category of women who are actually like wanting to be pregnant. So, I think that has been surprising for me and many of the women I know that like, and it's very hard when all of a sudden you have, friends in your life where that is becoming such a huge part of their world. And the whole thing of like wanting to be happy for people, but, it being difficult, all of that. So, I'm very interested in the private lives of women, but also the way that women kind of lift each other up and support each other. And this is, one of many, I feel like, ways that I've sort of looked at that throughout all my different books.
Can we talk about that a little bit more? Because that's one thing that you do so well throughout all of your books. Female relationships are really central in your books. Mm-hmm. There are romances, there are family relationships, there are friendships, and really it's the relationships that women have with each other. And what is it about the way women interact with each other, in these various ways that interests you so much? I have to imagine it was influenced by some of the books that you loved growing up, some of the communities that you've been a part of. What is it that draws you to the lives of women?
So, I guess in a personal way, I guess I have a personal and a literary answer. The personal answer is I've been really blessed in life to always have wonderful female friends. I grew up in a neighborhood with 6 other girls my age, and we're still very, very dear friends. I went to a women's college, and so I experienced that, all women living together in the absence of men. And that was something that really kind of creates a certain type of friendship. And those are still my closest friends to this day. And after I graduated, I worked at a women's magazine for 2 years. So again, I saw no men for 2 years. And I'm still really close with a lot of the women I worked with there. I think I did an event recently where I said I have no male friends, and my wonderful friend, Mike Johnson, I don't know if he's watching, but he texted me and said, I'm really offended. You have no friends. But he's my husband's best friend. So I'm like, I don't know if that really counts. But that's a perfect example. My husband's best friend, Mike Johnson, I don't know if he's watching now, but his wife and I, Melissa, dear, dear friend of mine too. The first time I met them, Melissa and I were like, okay, let's dig in. And like, we have gone so deep in the years we've known each other, probably deeper than our husbands have, even though they are like the closest friends in the world, because women are, I think it's great. I'm so glad I'm not a man, but women are really allowed to do that. And men, I don't know, I feel like every time, you go to a party and it's like women in the kitchen talking about everything under the sun,
Yep.
men in the dining room talking about sports. And it's like,
Yeah.
oh God, that sounds so boring.
That's
You
it,
know?
you know, it's so true. I have a friend who a male friend actually, who we talked about how women form relationships face to face and men form relationships side by side, which is like such
Totally.
like activities versus like, you know, women, we bond by sharing secrets, by telling things about
Yes.
ourselves.
That is
Like,
such a brilliant way of putting
like,
it.
like it's
And that's
like,
exactly like my husband and his best friend of 40 years will be like, we'll go to the beach and they will like go swimming, you know, and like
yep.
the wife and I, we're just gonna sit in our chairs and gossip. That's what we're gonna do, you know, and exactly right.
Yeah, there's
And
always an activity usually with male friendships, and with women,
yes.
it's like talking is the activity. You're gonna have
Yes.
coffee, but it doesn't matter what you have. It doesn't matter if it's coffee or wine or, you know,
Yes.
what you're gonna do. You're gonna talk. That's what
right.
we do.
That's exactly right.
And you do capture that so well in Friends and Strangers, and obviously like these communities that you've been a part of. I also I went to an all girls high school nearby. Just full disclosure for all of you out there, the viewers. Courtney and I grew up almost in the exact same area. We you know, never met each other, but we
Yep.
very very close by. And
Yep.
she knows the high school that I went to, and obviously we all know Smith.
And I think that's something too, is that the single sex education that I received, you know, I think in some ways it's kind of a chicken or the egg situation, because I do think that people who choose to go to women's colleges, it's like a pretty self-selecting bunch. Mm-hmm. It doesn't appeal to everyone, but it very much appealed to me. And that was partly because I was already really interested in feminism and, you know, women's literature. And when I was at Smith, I never was taught, I guess, the way that a lot of writers are, that the canon or the important stories are the stories about men.
Yes.
I never had to unlearn that, because I never learned that to begin with. And I feel extremely lucky about that.
That's so interesting what you said, because I always say the same thing, that, you know, growing up, there was no question of I was going to be the class president or on the student council, and I wasn't going to run against a guy. It was going to be another woman. Like, we were the captains of the teams. We were the president, you know, the stars of the plays, which like, and it really is a different environment. It just, it teaches you to expect leadership and expect, you know, power in a way, which is really an interesting thing. And yet you don't shy away either from exploring sort of the darker side of these communities. I mean, there are a lot of groups that you touch on in this book. There is the all-female college that Sam attends, but there's also, you know, the Brooklyn mommy group online, and there's the book club, and there's, you know, these these communities where maybe the best side of women doesn't come out either, which is part of that. And like, and I guess, you know, your experience, and I think my experience have been pretty similar, in all female dominated spaces has been a really positive thing. But what are some of the pitfalls that might come up? That kind of interest you?
I think, you know, women, I guess the flip side of the bonding over secrets and all of that is that women are very often, you know, talking about each other. That's just what we're doing. We're always talking about each other, and that's not always the best thing to do, I suppose. And there's, you know, kind of these groups. I mean, I was really fascinated by the idea that like women are really congregating in these online spaces, particularly on Facebook, because there's a whole thing with like message boards and being anonymous and all of that. That's really different. But like, if you're in a Facebook moms group for moms in your town or your neighborhood, or moms who went to your college or whatever, which I am, you know, you feel in some ways like you're in this really private space. And women, it just has amazed me what women say in those spaces about their frustrations with parenthood, with their marriages, whatever. It feels like a very safe, private space, but it's actually like the most public. You might as well just write that on a billboard, you know? So there's something really interesting about that tension. But I also think there's something, you know, moms can be ridiculous. And I love writing the funny, ridiculous parts of that. But also, I think those groups are amazing because women are like just so generous with their time. I mean, no one else but the mothers of young children care about these issues, but we all do care so intensely. And anyone can go on at any time and say, what's the best bottle for a colicky baby? And 25 women immediately give you an answer. It's like, it's so generous. They're really busy and they decided to do that, you know? So just this way that we help each other, I actually think is really amazing.
Yeah.
And really beautiful in the midst of all the ridiculousness.
Yes. And I do appreciate that you do take, you know, a little tongue in cheek, and you're not afraid to poke fun at, you know, the world that, you know, you and I both come from, and, you know, the world in which we live in now, which is, you know, which brings me to my next point of privilege, which, you know, there is privilege is central to this book and the complex around it. Like and it's touched on in such a nuanced and, you know, full way. Both Elizabeth and Sam are privileged in their own way. And they're both also, you know, feel like they're falling behind, and they're not privileged in many ways. And there's a privilege difference and a power dynamic between them, not just as employer and older woman and, you know, successful money and, you know, Sam starting out, but there's, you know, it extends out socially, and they both have good intentions and they both have their blind spots, and they both, you know, kind of mess up sometimes when, or maybe don't realize something that is inappropriate. And we're all in the midst of this massive social reckoning, which is rightfully very important. And we all should be asking ourselves, you know, what level of, we should all be, you know, coming to terms with our level of privilege and all of the issues that go with that. So it's a hot button issue. How did you approach tackling it in this book? What did it scare you at all? Was it a little intimidating to take on, or did you, you know, have some things that you knew you wanted to talk about and that this was the right space in which to talk about them, or did it unfold kind of naturally?
Well, I think that I was and still am and always have been really interested in the fact that there is this great spectrum of wealth and privilege, right? And most of us exist somewhere along the middle of that spectrum. So, you know, and Elizabeth does say in the book, and I think it's true, that no one ever thinks they have enough money. This is a problem with people who have a lot of money, because this sort of, you know, many hoops people jump through to keep their money are often to the detriment of the larger society. But, you know, Elizabeth is coming from a world. I mean, I have a friend who told me she had been a nanny for some very wealthy families, as I was too when I was younger. And she told me that, like, she nannied for this family and they had a brownstone in Brooklyn, and they essentially said, oh, you should see our friend's house. They have an elevator. And that was their way of saying, like, we're not that rich. We don't have an elevator in our brownstone, you know, whatever. We have to take the stairs. Like, we're roughing it. And, you know, that's something they said to their own babysitter. And it's like, just a certain cluelessness, right? But somehow I think in our culture, on the one hand, we revere wealth and we revere, you know, the idea of success and being and having everything. But we also always want to talk about being self-made and having invented our own luck and success. I think about it, you know, when you watch like a presidential debate and every single one of them is like, well, my great, great, great grandfather, you know, was an immigrant and worked in a shoe factory. And you're like, okay, but like your grandfather had 12 houses on Nantucket, you know, whatever. So that feeling of almost needing to feel regular. So here's Elizabeth. She has a trust fund. She's extremely privileged, but she doesn't really acknowledge that even to herself. And although Sam, who's much more middle class, graduating with a lot of student loan debt, feels, once she realizes that, feels a bit duped by Elizabeth. You know, Sam is really in the middle, and it was important to me to look at women who were not where she is on the spectrum, and these women who she works with in the dining hall, who are immigrants from El Salvador. You know, the thing I was thinking about was the concept of a safety net. So, you know, we don't all have trust funds, but if you are someone lucky enough to sort of exist in the middle, then what you do have is this safety net most of the time, that you do know that you will probably never have to worry about spending a night on the street. You know, there's always somewhere you can go. And education is a form of privilege. You know, citizenship is a form of privilege. And these are things we don't necessarily think about. So as you said, with the blind spots, I think the blind spots come from, in both cases, these women not really acknowledging their own privilege because they want to connect with other people in their lives, but they are just not quite going about it the right way, and not listening. You know, there's this, Gloria Steinem always says that this story about how when she was in college, she was on a geology field trip, and she saw this turtle that was about to like walk onto the road, and she said, "Oh no!" And she took the turtle and took it all the way back to the stream, you know, half a mile away. And then her professor said, "Why did you do that? What are you doing?" And turtles have to go uphill to dry land to lay their eggs. So you just set that turtle back so far. And she said, you know, that life lesson for her in that was always ask the turtle, like ask the turtle what the turtle needs. And so, you know, that these women do not do that in this book, and it leads to a lot of problems.
Yes, it does. I mean, and it's all so very real and so very relatable. And in many areas, going a little bit deeper, we obviously have, you know, I want to talk about the setting a little bit, because it's this upstate New York town that used to be a manufacturing hub, and that was where all the industry came from, and it's basically been abandoned. And I went to college in one of those towns in upstate New York that was essentially, you know, totally abandoned. And other than the college, there really wasn't anything around. And it was the dichotomy was so stark between, you know, the students who tended to be, you know, very privileged, very wealthy, and the surrounding area. And there are so many areas like this across the country that have been abandoned, and that are not, there's almost no way you can really make a life for yourself. And you so eloquently illustrate this through George, through the character of George, and his, you know, George is Elizabeth's father-in-law, for those of you who haven't read the book yet. And he has lost his livelihood, and he has sort of become obsessed with, as so many people have, the idea that that, you know, the little guy has been left behind. And he illustrates this through a concept which is so lovely and so accurate, called the hollow tree. And I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about the hollow tree itself, the concept behind it, and where the idea for it came from, and, you know, why this is so important for all of us as Americans to think about right now.
It was actually, so my mother came up with this term several years ago. Yeah. And she was describing how in all these different parts of her life, you know, she was witnessing the kind of hollowing out of American institutions, and how, you know, if you really looked, you'd see there's no there, but from the outside, at first glance, it looks the same. So for example, you know, okay, unemployment is low, that's great. But what about the fact that the gig economy makes it so that you might have 3 jobs and you're still not making a decent living? You know, what about the fact that the gig economy makes it so that you do not have health insurance through your employer, when that's how Americans are told to have health insurance, and all these other things. And I think that, you know, what has happened with COVID is we've seen how people were really hanging on by a thread in so many cases, because there's tens of millions of Americans who lost their jobs in, you know, a day. And that sense of, you know, things look okay, but they're really not okay. You know, and now we're in this position where it's like, will millions of people be evicted from their homes or not? We don't know. So that sense of how many people are living really close to the edge, and in a place like you mentioned, in a college town, you know, oftentimes you have your campus, you have, you know, fascinating intellectual minds coming through all the time. Famous writers are coming to speak or whatever it is. And then you have 3 blocks of beautiful vegan cafes and music venues and whatever. But beyond that, you just have people really struggling to stay afloat.
Yes. Yeah, you do. You're absolutely right. It's you know, it's such a strange thing. And if you've never been, you know, in an area like that before, it's really, you know, a necessary awakening of this is how the rest of the world, you know, lives. This is how most of the country is. This is not, you know, again, you and I both come from an area in Massachusetts where it's pretty lovely here, you know, like we're pretty lucky. The area around Boston is a very educated, very affluent, very beautiful place. And it's, you know, and I know you've lived in Brooklyn for years and I've lived in major cities as well. And when you're used to those different environments where, you know, you're surrounded by every amenity you could ever hope for, you do sort of forget sometimes, you know, and it's important that we don't. But pivoting a little bit and speaking of, I want to ask you, and this is not specifically, there is some of this in Friends and Strangers, because of course we have complicated family relationships as well. Elizabeth has a very dysfunctional family, and you know, her husband's family is equally dysfunctional in a different way. It might be less cruel, outwardly cruel, but you know, or callous maybe is the better term, but there is, you know, dysfunction, and you write dysfunctional families so well while also making them incredibly charming. And you know, and you have a particular talent for in many of your other books as well that you've explored, of the Irish Catholic big family dynamic that is so prevalent in the Northeast and the area in which we grew up. But in general, you know, what about these family dynamics appeals to you? What is so fun about writing dysfunctional families? Because you do it so well.
It's funny because I realized at a certain point, because I am often associated with dysfunctional families, that it's like you never hear about a novel about a functional family, you know, because it would be such a boring novel. But the sort of thing that, one of the things that fascinates me the most about fiction is the fact that you are inside the heads of your characters. And, you know, as human beings, we can find out a lot, but we can never, ever find out what's in someone else's head and heart, even the people closest to us. And as a fiction writer, you can kind of go there, or you can at least imagine your way there. And so I think a family is just like the ultimate in a group dynamic, where everyone experiences, you know, one thing, the same moment in totally different ways, or everyone remembers something in a totally different way, or everyone's opinion of one person or one experience is so different. And I love just like getting into that and seeing how so much of the experience we have as individuals comes just down to how we see the world, as opposed to what has actually just happened, you know? So I think that is just like a very delicious, you know, thing to dig into as a writer, for sure.
It's so fun. It's so fun. Do you, and you write the scenes so well, how do you go about constructing a scene that is, you know, you write large scenes with lots of people very well. You write intimate scenes well too, but you know, those big scenes where you have lots of things happening, even, you know, a dinner scene or something like that, when you have 4 or 5 characters, do you think cinematically about it? Do you sort of think of yourself like a, a film director looking at it? How do you write your way into scenes like that?
Well, I love writing dialogue. Writing dialogue is probably my favorite thing. I had a writing student last year who said to me, I don't know if I'm really meant to write fiction because I find it really boring, the part where you have to say, okay, and she walked over to the sink and she poured a glass of water and
Yeah.
da da da. And I'm like, no, I think that is really boring. But you have to do it because you have to create the world for the reader.
Yep.
But so that's part of your job. But I think, but what's really fun is just like getting the rhythm of a conversation between people and what is said, and of course what goes unsaid, or knowing as the reader and knowing as the writer, oh, this person said this, but what they really meant was that, or what did they hold back, or whatever it might be. So I usually do start with just like straight up, here's the conversation. So in that way, maybe it is almost like writing a script, and then fill in, what are they actually doing? What are they seeing? What are they eating? Whatever it is, to paint the fuller picture. But often in a group scene, I do start with just the conversation between them.
That's really cool. That's a good way to approach it. And I guess more broadly, when you're entering into a project, so Friends and Strangers, obviously we know where the idea came from and there was a loose concept. But did you then say, okay, did the characters come first? Or did you say, I want to write about this town in upstate New York and this would be a great place to populate? What's your usual, do you have a typical entry point into a novel? Is it through character, through plot, through setting? What's the thing that sort of sparks you the most?
I think it's always something different, to be honest, but there's something, and it will just kind of like take hold. And I think I have a lot of ideas, so over the course of time spent writing a book, whether it's 2 years or 3 years or 4 years, I'm always thinking of kind of what will I write next. And there are ideas that I'm like, that's amazing. And then 3 days later, I've forgotten it completely, or I've realized it's not amazing, or I've realized that it's from a totally different book that already exists, or whatever. I think if an idea just sticks with you and won't leave you alone, then eventually you're like, okay, I hear you, I'll write it. And, I generally just have like a very blurry sense of the overall, but I don't outline. I don't, nothing really formal, because I think for me, the characters very much do go down paths of their own. I've talked to different fiction writers who think that, and those who think that's completely absurd.
One of those divisive topics that I agree. I actually agree with you that I'm often surprised by characters, that I think they're real people who I'm trying to figure out the right answer rather than,
and there's something really fun about that. For me, if I were writing to an outline, I don't know, it wouldn't be as exciting to me as, okay, I kind of know where they're going to start. I kind of know where they're going to end, but I really don't know what's going to happen getting them from A to Z.
Mm-hmm. Because so much of your plot too is based on character and based on decision that's informed by psychological reflection and choice, and all of that. Like your plots really are very character driven. Somebody makes a choice and then XYZ happens, so that makes sense that you approach it that way.
And sometimes as you're writing, a character, sometimes as I am writing a character, I'm figuring out who they are. So, it might come to a point where I say, oh no, I just realized she never would have done that thing she did in chapter 3. So now I have to go back and sort of pull out all those threads and make it something else.
Yeah. Speaking of, you mentioned you always have ideas. Can you tell us, are you working on something right now? And if so, and I say that understanding that these are crazy times. So, if you're not, is it because of COVID, and how has COVID changed your typical process? What's writing life like these days, Courtney? How's it going?
Well, I've had no childcare since mid-March, really. So, so it's not really going that well, but
of course.
I know.
Oh no, did we lose you? We may have just lost Courtney for a second, but we'll give her a minute and see if she pops back on. I know that there were some technical difficulties going on today. Might be an internet issue, so we'll see if we can get her back on. Here she is. She's coming back on. Thanks, guys, for bearing with us. There she is.
Oh no, I'm so sorry.
No, that's like dramatic and exciting. That was the most dramatic and exciting thing that's happened. No,
What are you writing next?
Yeah.
And
And
disappear.
then just like black, like you're like, I'm not telling them.
How dare you ask that? I'm leaving.
I'm not.
I have an idea. It's
Oh.
sort of a ghost story. It takes place in
Ooh.
Maine. I
Nice.
know the characters. I've been thinking about them for many, many years.
Mm.
And someday I will have childcare and I will write it.
Someday. We
I hope
need
that they-
calling all Sams out there. We need we need a good we need some I mean I think a lot of women are feeling that right now, and a lot of men too, a lot of families. Obviously everybody's going through this together. These are insane times, and this is not normal. So, congratulations on making it through the days, because
Thanks.
that's like, I feel like if I make it through the day, that's an accomplishment right now.
Yep.
And I think we all need to pat ourselves on the back a little bit more and give ourselves, a bit of grace.
Especially in the beginning with COVID. I really thought of it. It reminded me of the experience of having a newborn, because when you have a newborn, people tell you it's really successful if you can do one thing a day.
Yes.
And the thing can be taking a shower or making yourself a sandwich. It's just that you're in a huge moment of transition and it's brand new to you. And, that's going to take up every bit of your sanity and your, so it felt like that to me in the beginning. Now we're sort of like, I don't know what stage we're at, if we're in the middle, I don't know where we are, but now I guess it's more normal.
Yeah, we're in the this is still terrible, but we're living with it day to day. But you're right, it's a very traumatic shift. And you had a big life shift at the beginning of this whole process because of this whole situation. And you've said that your books are often self-fulfilling prophecies. How has your life changed in a way that is a little bit similar to Friends?
It's crazy, especially because we're now in Massachusetts, but we were for 4 months, from March until just recently. We were in Albany, the suburbs of Albany.
New York.
And that's basically where Elizabeth lives in the book. She says we're upstate, but it's not cool upstate. It's north of cool upstate. And that's basically where we were. So it was so weird, because it was like, I've never been in that part of the world. I've never thought about it really. And all of a sudden, oh, here we are, so that feeling, it's very true that my books do tend to have some self-fulfilling prophecy. I have seriously pitched my agent on letting me write a book about people who win the Powerball, but she has said no. So I just thought, well, maybe that will, I don't know. Who knows?
I feel like I would be like, I am gonna write a book about an author who becomes a bazillionaire. And
Exactly.
Come on, Courtney, write yourself that future.
Right? Exactly. Aim higher than just like random, move to upstate New York. Yeah.
Although it's ironic that you're struggling with childcare right now, given this book. Like
no kidding.
That's almost like the universe taunting you a little bit.
It's so true. You're right. It's like, you think there's problems with this woman and her babysitter? Imagine what it would be like to have no babysitter. Oh, here, find out. You're right.
Yeah, it's such a great book though. And here's a little fun question, because I've just fallen in love with every character in every book that you write.
Thank you.
And I would love to know, if this is something I always love to ask authors, if you could choose any of your characters over the course of any of your books to spend a day with and to hang out with, who would you choose and what would you do and where?
I would choose Frances Garrity from The Engagements.
Yes.
Who is the only character I've ever written who's a real person, and passed away long before I wrote about her, but she was this wonderful pioneer in the world of advertising who wrote the line, "A diamond is forever."
Yes.
And when you write fiction, I noticed this as a reader too. When you write fiction about a real person, I think you cannot help but feel this like kinship with that person.
Yeah.
And I felt such a kinship with Frances. And I really want to know how similar she really is to me, as if she really is as similar to me as I think she is, or how much of that I invented. So I would love to know that. And in the process of writing that book and writing her, I met a woman named Deanne Dunning, who was her successor at the advertising agency and much more representative of the kind of late 60s, early 70s, like first young woman to be a vice president at the agency and all of that. And I interviewed her for the book. She was then in her 70s. And then we just became really dear friends and started having dinner once a month. And she regretted that she hadn't taken Frances more seriously at the time, because Deanne was this young kind of hotshot at the time. She just saw Frances as this like old fuddy-duddy lady who was retiring and didn't really. So after she sort of got reacquainted with Frances through talking to me for my book, she was like, I really wish I could have asked her all these questions. And sadly, Deanne passed away about a year and a half ago. And, it's a strange thing to have like a close friend who's 80 years old, because right when you're 30, mid-30s, well, now I'm late 30s, but that kind of like, you don't even really know where to put that. You wouldn't really, I don't know. Like, I didn't say to people like, my dear friend died, because it's like, but she was 80. I don't know. It's just a weird thing. And I would just, if I could, I would die to sit down. Maybe I will someday see them on the other side. I will have to die to sit down with Frances and Deanne and be part of that trio.
That's really cool. I love that. I mean, I think that speaks to you. I'm actually not surprised that you're able to have a close friendship with an 80-year-old, because you also write women of all ages, and you really get into their psyches. Like, you really, it doesn't feel like somebody who's 40, 50 years younger.
Good. Thank you. I'm glad. I think I am an old lady at heart, honestly.
Aren't we all? It's the grand millennial. This has been so great. Courtney, thank you so much for being with us. Before we go, I just want to remind everyone to please pick up Friends and Strangers. And if you could, please do so from an independent bookstore. There are some signed copies of Friends and Strangers at Books Are Magic in Brooklyn, right? And and then also the Concord Bookshop, we want to give a shout out to. Courtney has said that she'll get some signed copies to them as well, if there aren't any. And I know many of the local bookstores, if you're in Massachusetts, also do have signed copies, because I got a signed one from Titcomb's down on Cape Cod. So they're I know, isn't it so cute? So their signed copies are out.
I think they might have quite a few, actually. Titcomb's is a great one.
Yeah, and they're shipping. They're you know what? Maybe they're not anymore. They might have stopped that, but I'm not sure. But they're great. And if you're on the Cape, pick it up there. Thank you so much for being here. One last question before you go. What's one book that you're either reading or, because of COVID, hoping to read at some point in the near future?
I have to say the book of the year for me, actually, weirdly, it's right here. Writers and Lovers by Lily King.
So good. It's so good.
So good. Phenomenal. Love it so much. Everyone, if you have not read it, you need to go read it immediately. Just drop everything, go read it. Ignore your children, lock yourself in the bathroom.
I loved the locking herself in the bathroom scenes with Elizabeth. I'm like,
I've locked myself in the bathroom so many times over the last 3 years. It's incredible. And the weird thing is, you will see this. It's like a lot of times, like you want to escape your children so much, and then you lock yourself in the bathroom, and then you start looking at pictures of your children.
Yep.
Or you put them to bed, and then you start looking at their pictures, and you're like, what is wrong with me? Like, it's an amazing.
It's biological. It's so that we, you know, like, thank God for biology that it kicks in and helps you not kill your children, because
that's true.
Courtney, thank you so much. This has been so much fun. Everyone, one more time, congratulations on Friends and Strangers. Everyone pick it up. Thank you for being here on AMB's Frontliner Friday. We have been thrilled to have you. I've loved this conversation. I would keep it going forever, but
me too. Thank you.
Thank you guys so much. And we will see you next Friday. Thank you so much for being here.